Hello gamers, I am John, host of Video Games in the World. Last episode we spoke about how Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn had deep messages about tolerance and acceptance. As you know, video games reflect the real world and there's so many allusions to it. So many of them to history, culture, and religion. But what about historical conflicts over who would succeed the throne and be elevated to such position of power? And what was the driving force behind these tragic conflicts and those who truly desire power over all? That is what we shall explore in this episode about Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, this is one of my most favorite tactical RPGs ever, but I love Fire Emblem more than this game. No bias intended. There will be some major spoilers in this episode, you've been warned. Let us begin now, shall we? Final Fantasy Tactics takes place in the world of Ivalice. The story takes place after the 50 Years' War between Ivalice and Odalia, in which Ivalice was defeated. The nobility has abandoned the commoners, labeling them as animals. Most of the commoners hated the nobles and formed the Corpse Brigade. The Corpse Brigade was comprised of commoner soldiers who were denied pay in the 50 Years' War. Meet Ramza Beolve, a young man from House Beolve, a noble family with pillars of knighthood. Ramza is a highborn cadet who finds himself in the midst of a military conflict known as the War of the Lions, started by Duke Larg and Duke Goltana, who are fighting for the crown. On the other side is Delita Hyrule, an old friend of Ramza who goes a separate way after an arrogant noble, Argath, negligently kills his sister Tetra. When Ramza becomes a mercenary, he discovers that a sinister conspiracy is behind this tragic war. The War of the Lions is fought between the Order of the Northern Sky Knights of Duke Larg under the banner of the White Lion, and the Order of the Southern Sky Knights of Duke Goltana under the banner of the Black Lion. King Ondoria Adkashat III died due to the Black Death, and his heir, Prince Orinus, is just 2 years old. A regent is sought to rule in the prince's place, and both dukes, who were decorated generals in the 50 Years' War, were nominated as regent. One of the main reasons behind the war is the rift between Queen Luveria and the nobles of Ivalice. Queen Luveria is regarded as a power-mad queen, Cersei style, who desires her offspring on the throne so that she may rule the kingdom. The Council of Nobles, out to stop her from asserting influence onto the kingdom, appoints Duke Goltana and their preferred candidate for the regency. As the story goes on, there are lots of battles such as the Battle of Lassalia, battle on the plains of Limberi, not to forget that during this conflict conditions were worsening. The Queen and Chancellor Levan were accused of kidnapping the Princess Ovelia to allow Larg to ascend the throne. There was also extreme famine due to a drought everywhere, which caused mass starvation and hunger among the civilians. The war reached a climax at Fort Besalat when Ramza intervened by opening the garrison's sluice, bringing the battle to an indecisive halt. Musfungus is released into the air by Barak Vensor, one of the Knights Templar, severely weakening both sides. In the confusion, both dukes are murdered by their respective traitors, Larg by Daisadarg Beolve and Goltana by Delita Hyrule. As originally planned, the church offers mediators. Despite the loss of both orders' leaders, their armies are still strong and refuse the idea. This may be because of Ramza's intervention, whereas without it, both sides would have suffered major losses if the sluice wasn't opened. Ramza Beolve travels with his companions to Orban Monastery to stop the Knights Templar and the Lucavi's plot for Ultima's resurrection. Now, this game has historical allusions and also an anti-organized religion message. Let's dive into the historical allusions now. Our first historical allusion in the game is the 50 Years' War. The 50 Years' War was a conflict before the events of Final Fantasy Tactics. It was a conflict between Ivalice and Ordalia, a neighboring kingdom to the east. At the end of the war, many soldiers that were commoners were denied their pay, leading to the formation of the Death Corps. The 50 Years' War alludes the real-life 100 Years' War between France and England. Ivalice alludes the country of England, while Ordalia alludes the country of France. Although Ordalia did not have a Joan of Arc figure that rallied the Ordalians in their time of need, as Joan of Arc did for the French, as well as many discrepancies in the outcome. The 100 Years' War was a series of conflicts waged from 24 May 1337 to 19th of October 1453. The belligerents were the House of Plantagenet of the English kingdom and the House of Valois of the French kingdom. Two factors lay at the origin of the conflict. First, the status of the Duchy of Guyenne. Though it belonged to the kings of England, it remained a fief of the French crown, and the kings of England wanted independent possession. Second, as the closest relatives of the last Capetian king, Charles IV, who had died in 1328, the kings of England from 1337 claimed the crown of France. The French kings had possessed financial and military resources and was a larger kingdom, which of course had advantage over the smaller. But the English had a very well-trained and disciplined military, in which they used their longbows to stop cavalry charges, proved repeatedly victorious over much larger French forces. Significant victories occurred by sea at Sluis and by land at Crécy and Poitiers. In 1360, King John of France, in order to save his title, was forced to accept the Treaty of Calais, which granted complete independence to the Duchy of Guyenne, now considerably enlarged to include almost a third of France. However, his son Charles V, with the help of his commander-in-chief Bertrand du Guesclin, by 1380 had succeeded in reconquering almost all the ceded territory, notably by a series of sieges. During the reign of Henry V, England renewed its war against France and was victorious in battles such as Agincourt, the conquest of Normandy, and then he attempted to crown himself the King of France by the Treaty of Troyes. Henry V was successful with his military campaigns, but these campaigns were not matched with his political successes. He was allied with the Dukes of Burgundy, but the majority of the French refused domination from England. Thanks to Joan of Arc, the siege of Orléans was lifted. Then Paris and the Île-de-France were liberated, and after the French army had been reorganized and reformed, Charles VII recaptured the Duchy of Normandy and then seized Guyenne. The end of the conflict was never marked by a peace treaty, but died out because the English recognized that the French troops were too strong to be directly confronted. Back to Final Fantasy tactics. After the 50 Years' War, Ivalice was financially in distress. Many who returned from the war were denied pay and were abandoned by the nobility. Soon, the commoners became very poor and hungry, and the ones who returned from the war became resentful towards the nobility, who saw the commoners as nothing but animals. An example of nobles looking down on commoners is the arrogant Argath Adalphus. Argath is the kind of character in this game that can anger you so much, especially when, spoiler alert, he negligently kills Delita's sister, Tetra. Many of these veterans became thieves, plunderers, and murderers plotting rebellion against the royal family. This resulted in the creation of the Corpse Brigade, or the Death Corps in the original translation, which was created by Wygraf Falls. The aftermath of the 50 Years' War would later lead to the War of the Lions. Similarly, England went through such a similar phase after the 100 Years' War. English landowners complained vociferously about the financial losses resulting from the loss of their continental holdings. This is often considered a major cause of the War of the Roses that started in 1455. Earlier at the beginning of this episode, we have spoken about the War of the Lions. It is very similar to the historical civil war in England known as the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses were a series of civil wars in medieval England over who would succeed to the throne of England. The belligerents of the war were the houses of Lancaster and York. Yeah, most of you will say that the War of Roses is a real-life Game of Thrones, which, in many ways, it was. The causes of the war were the following. Both houses of York and Lancaster were direct descendants of King Edward III. The ruling Lancastrian king, Henry VI, surrounded himself with unpopular nobles, the civil unrest of much of the population, the availability of many powerful lords with their own private armies, and the untimely episodes of mental illness by Henry VI. The wars ended when Richard III, the last Yorkist king, was defeated at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 by Henry Tudor, founder of the House of Tudor. These wars were named many years afterward from the supposed badges of the contending parties, the White Rose of York and the Red of Lancaster. After the death of Henry V in 1422, the country was subject to the long and factious minority of Henry VI, during which the English kingdom was managed by the King's Council, a predominantly aristocratic body. That arrangement, which probably did not accord with Henry V's last wishes, was not maintained without difficulty. Like Richard II before him, Henry VI had powerful relatives eager to grasp after power and to place themselves at the head of factions in the state. The council soon became their battleground. Great magnates with private armies dominated the countryside. Lawlessness was rife and taxation burdensome. Henry later proved to be feckless and simple-minded, subject to spells of madness, and dominated by his ambitious queen, Margaret of Anjou, a real-life Cersei, whose party had allowed the English position in France to deteriorate. There were many battles in that time, such as St. Albans, in which resulted in the Yorkist victory, and 4 years of uneasy truce. A new phase of the Civil War began in 1459 when York, goaded by the Queen's undisguised preparations to attack him, rebelled for the last time. The Yorkists were successful at Blore Heath, but were scattered after a skirmish at Ludford Bridge. York fled to Ireland, and the Lancastrians in the packed parliament at Coventry obtained a judicial condemnation of their opponents and executed those on whom they could lay hands on. Other events include the ascendancy of Warwick, the victory of Edward IV, and the final battle of the war was the Battle of Bosworth Field. This final battle overthrew the York dynasty, the death of Richard III, and gave rise and ascension to the Tudor dynasty. The War of the Lions has its similarities to the War of the Roses, in which two factions are fighting for the throne. The war throws the country into famine, economic crisis, and various uprisings. The war's decisive battle is the Battle of Fort Bessalad, in which Ramza Beolve intervenes by opening the garrison sluice, bringing the battle to an indecisive halt. Musfungus is released into the air by Barich Fensor, one of the Knights Templar, severely weakening both sides. In the confusion, both dukes are murdered by their respective traitors, Larg by Daisadarg Beolve and Goltana by Delita. As originally planned, the church offers mediators. Despite the loss of both orders' leaders, their armies are still strong and refuse the idea. This may be because Ramza's intervention, whereas without it, both sides would have suffered major losses if the sluice wasn't opened. Ramza Beolve travels with his companions to Orban Monastery to stop the Knights Templar and the Lucavi's plot for Ultima's resurrection, killing the church's forces that dared to stop them. They are teleported to the airship graveyard beneath the necrohole of Mulond and destroy Ultima with their own fate left a mystery. With the two sides crippled, the war comes to an end. In lack of a leader, with the two dukes killed, Queen Luveria imprisoned at Fort Bessalad, High Confessor Funebris murdered, Daisadarg slain, and Orlando missing and believed dead, Delita Hyrule exploits the situation by claiming he rescued Princess Ophelia, marrying her to become king of all Ivalice. However, this marriage is not one made in heaven, but a tragic one. Delita might have united all of Ivalice and became its king, but his cruel actions against the only people who ever cared about him probably hunted him for the rest of his life. This makes Delita Hyrule, in Final Fantasy Tactics, a tragic character. I've spoken about Final Fantasy and religion various times since starting this series, but some people would say that this game is anti-religion. For the record, I despise organized religion due to the atrocities it has committed throughout history, such as people using the Bible to justify enslaving others, the Crusades, justifying prejudice against LGBT, declaring wars in the name of God, forcing women to cover up, controlling the arts, controlling the sciences, and a lot of other things. Not to mention how the ruling religion in the country would outlaw other religious practices. Now, is this game truly anti-religion? Honestly, no. But it shows how the Church of Glabados is the mastermind behind the War of the Lions. The war was engineered by the Church of Glabados so that it may take center stage after both sides are weakened to exhaustion. The High Confessor, Marcel Funebris, wishing for the church to gain power over the land, supported both sides secretly and assisted in their plots for the throne. The church planned to destroy the two lions from the inside and use the Auricides to strengthen the church's military power. In reality, the manipulating church was being manipulated by the Knights Templar under Folmarv Tengil, who attempted to collect every Auricide to help the Lucavi, who granted them immense strength and power. The Lucavi's motive was the resurrection of their leader, Ultima, the High Seraph, who wishes to destroy Ivalice. The bloodshed needed for Ultima's coming was the reason behind the War of the Lions. The Church of Glabados in Final Fantasy Tactics is based on the real-life Roman Catholic Church. During the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church controlled the sciences and the arts. Not to forget, it was very authoritarian in nature. The truth about these atrocities is that whenever the wrong people are in power, they seek to eliminate what they deem to be against their faith, ideology, or principles, and they seek to eliminate those who threaten their power. Let us also not forget that the Roman Catholic Church was also responsible for many wars, such as the Catholic-Protestant Wars during the reign of Mary Tudor, which in history remembers her as Bloody Mary. And finally, in conclusion, wow. Making this episode was really painful to do. A lot of it was doing some research into these historical events and also searching for the ones responsible for these tragic events in history. Truth is, there are people who desire power to rule over all, while others want to have the power to do what is right and just. Finally, some people desire power to make the world better, but they use that power to satisfy their feeling of being morally superior towards all other people. And most times when they say that they want to make the world a better place, they don't really mean for everyone. They truly mean when it suits them and the people blindly following them without thinking twice about it. However, like the quote of Final Fantasy VI says at the very beginning of the game, there are those in power who are on the verge of repeating a senseless and fatal mistake. Power corrupts if used the wrong way for your own personal gain to run everything. When people want the whole world, they will realize that they will only lose themselves. Until next time, gamers, this is John, host of Video Games in the World. Have a good one. Bye-bye.